Christopher Crystal with Financial Stockholm. Today is Friday, November 18th, and I'm here in Sweden. And these are our thoughts about what we're seeing in the Swedish press and the general news, our reactions to it, as well as some of what's going on in Europe. So what we're seeing today in the Swedish press is a lot of discussion about electricity. We're going to have a winter storm, and the prices of electricity will go up again. So that's negative for us, obviously, because more people die in the cold than the heat. But the other problem to it is that our recent inflation gauge ratings came out where we showed a 7.7, as opposed to the increase being around 9 or better than 9 or closer to 11 like the rest of Europe. And so we were saying, hey, look, we're seeing our inflation decline. Although the food prices have gone up and continue to climb, we are looking at a lower inflation rate. That's because the energy price of electricity is a heavy component to it. Now, if electricity prices are going to spike again, we'll probably see another rise in inflation. And that's going to be difficult for a lot of households coming up just for the daily cost of living and the reaction from the Swedish Riksbank and what the interest rate cycle will be and how much more the increase will be if there is an increase, but there's likely to be an increase based on Ingves's previous comments. So the banking head is looking at it, and it doesn't look good. So that's going to be an issue for us on our economy. And then we have some very big announcements from our Swedish government. So we saw that the security police, or our secret police, kind of our intelligence agency, has come out and said it's very clear that it was sabotage for Nord Stream 1 and 2. And then to further back this up, the prosecutor's ministry has come out and said, yes, there was a crime, and we confirm what the intelligence agency is saying. And so they don't clearly know who's done it, but they are very clear in seeing that it was a planned operation that was at an elite level and engineered to blow up the pipelines when the Nord Stream 1 and 2 were blown up. So who they come out against, whether who in the world it was, is yet to be seen. But if it is shaking a little bit of our confidence in what's going on in terms of munitions. So in our participation to the Ukraine, we had committed the other day that we would be sending 300 million euros worth of Swedish munitions. And today we see in the paper that our munitions have a cult-like status because they're so good at blowing up tanks, and these missile defense systems are widely appreciated. And then, of course, we're sending over troop transports. However, we've now redefined that amount, and we'll be sending less than the 300 million. And that's after the missiles were shot from the Ukraine into Poland, killing 2 farmers, and were determined to have come from Ukraine. And so we're not having a clear picture yet. We have committed to a full commitment with the Ukrainians to stand beside them for what we are calling this unprovoked attack from Russia and a war, and helping them out. So the issue there on how this happened has yet to be determined. And so the Nord Stream 2 will go further in determining where the explosives came from and who the parties were behind it, what nation states were involved, and we'll see what happens. Germany is doing their own investigation, as is Denmark, but it's not unlikely that they all come to the same conclusions of it was sabotage. So that's something interesting for the Swedish economy, but our military companies will still continue to benefit. If you're in an ESG fund, they of course are not included at this time, but they are companies that are going to benefit from these orders because we are going to be giving them quite a bit. And the amounts that they're talking about would equal to the amount that we've already provided for our own military forces. So those would be areas to look at. Further to look at would be on the electricity side, because we had been a participant to this EU 200 billion and what would be given back to consumers. And that was part of the campaign from the government, the coalition government. Would be solved by November 1st, and it's the 18th. We still haven't resolved it. The energy minister, Eva Busch, she went down to Luxembourg. She came back and she doesn't have a clear date for when it'll happen, but it'll happen. and they've priced out the models for the different regions. We in the South have a poorer energy grid or supply, so we're paying more than those in the north and central part of Sweden. So we're going to get more of that money, but there's going to be maximum amounts, and it's still not clear when we'll get paid. And so for the average household, that may be okay, but for the businesses that are operating on a high intensity energy need, like bakeries, like chocolate shops, these shops will be dramatically affected. And so what this means is really for the politics is how that affects them within the next 4 years. So the mandate period is for the 4 years, but we have the ability to see a no confidence vote before then. And what that would mean, it's not clear. But there's a lot of discussion in our politics about the future of our energy grid and how it's going to be conducted. It looks like we might get another reactor back online. It could take about 2 years or 6 months. That would be the Ringhole 4, reactivating it. And then the Ringhole 1 and 2 look to be more in line with, say, an SMR. The problem is that Uniper is about a 25% owner of the power works involved. And the German government and Uniper have said that they're not going to be involved in nuclear. So as they are a minority owner, we have the power to veto them with the government and the shareholders and so forth. However, it's not clear yet if we'll choose a high pressure steam or if we're going to go with, say, something like a SMR. SMR looks more and more likely because it would be easier to negotiate and faster to build. And you can also get it going for other SMR projects throughout Sweden. So that's something for our electricity network. And then, and like I said, we're having a winter storm. So the winter storm will come in this weekend and will raise the cost of electricity. So we probably see a raise in the inflation rate. On the business side, you still have a lot of companies suffering. You have some shifting around in the real estate industry. You see a CEO going from one company, Castellum, over to another company, SBB, so going over to the other side. So there's a lot of questions about some of the real estate companies here in Sweden and what their financing is, if they're stable enough to survive without selling assets. It still remains to be seen, but it looks like that will happen. So the real estate market could be coming down to some good buy levels, some people are feeling. A lot of the small savers in the Swedish market have been buying and investing in Swedish stocks. I still don't see the fundamentals for why they would do this, but there are a lot of people who are somewhat enthusiastic about the Swedish equity market. Names like Embracer, which are more tied to gaming stocks, have been getting some of the favor. You, of course, see some of the biotechs getting some participation. And then, of course, you have many candidates that are open for shorting. And so we'll keep watching what happens there. But I think what's most important for the long-term outlook is the power network, because as we see this decline in power production in Europe, and you see finally in England, where they're going to have the most expensive price for electricity in Europe, they're looking at something like a 7% decrease in household income or household wealth as a result of their high energy cost and the rising inflation. And you're starting to see more joblessness, which we're also seeing climbing here in Sweden. They finally agreed to building the Sidewell C project in England. So they're slowly considering how they're going to move forward with their power production. They're shying away from fracking, which would be a relatively quick release of energy and power production for them, but they're shying away from that. Italy, however, looks like they're going to be taking in fracking and start doing their own. And no sign on nuclear, but this is a result for Italy because they had been proposing a pipeline from Spain into Italy, which was declined by the EU. So they have to resort to their own needs. And so what we see here in Europe is a reflection of what you're seeing worldwide with politics, is that when do the voters finally get their will through, which is to have a good lifestyle? And when do the politicians start to realize if they don't fulfill the voter needs, they will be voted out? And so then, I mean, you could go to totalitarian questions and, you know, when would the government simply just take over? But if you use the example of the United States and how the election cycle has been working, if you're doing close enough to what the voters would expect, you can stay in office and get in office. if you're not doing it, and then we come down to the question of the candidates, like a Donald Trump versus a Joe Biden, and the question of, are these good candidates? Who's got the highest level of corruption? Who is the most beneficial for the economy? Who is least likely to cause emotion or turmoil and keep people away from each other? That comes down to the play. Otherwise, you wouldn't have candidates who are doing very little campaigning winning over candidates who are out campaigning a lot, but offering no real message, losing. Because the voters understand what the message is from the candidate who's not campaigning, and they're not clear on what the message is from the candidate who is campaigning. And if they just see it as the individual who's going to create the emotional turmoil, they're voting away from that. So if we reflect back here to Europe and what could happen in Sweden, there's no long-term guarantee ever in politics, but you would see somebody like the Sverigedemokraterna, which have risen up to the second largest party in Sweden, quickly becoming neutralized back to where they were 5 years ago, if they're not able to capitalize and show in the voters that the economy can work for them. So they're doing little tricks like they're proposing to give away 1,200 kroner to a different town, so that each individual, or not town, but a land, would have this money and be able to spend it as kind of a remuneration of money that came from their taxes. They would get that money back. And you have attempts at restoring the social stability within Sweden in terms of lowering of crime. There's been very little done there. And then, of course, the asylum issue comes up. Sweden has lowered it down where they don't have to accept more than 900. And this was versus what they had before of 5,000. But we see the rate of asylum seekers rising to 15,000 in Sweden. That's up from 11,000 last year. So we'll watch and see how it develops. But right now, everything's still very shaky on the politics. And whether it's the energy politics or the asylum politics, you have a lot going on where the need to really start to deliver for their voters, and they need to get better candidates so they don't have this issue of Nazism, and they need to eliminate these individuals that are extreme, and that would be on both sides. But neither seems to really pay attention. They're only doing what's best for them. So, but ahead of the weekend, we'll wish you the best. And there's always money to be made in the market, whether you're long or you're short. If you're going long-term or short-term trading, either way, you can find different ways to make money. So with that, we'll wish you a great weekend. Thank you.